Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Tes Amud Beis, 29b of Maseches Megillah. We're starting 2 lines from the bottom of the page, where the Gemara says Itmar, and it's the middle of the line. So it says Itmar Chalios B'Va'ata Tetzaveh. So let's say Parsha Shkalim falls out the week of Parshas Tetzaveh. So again, Parsha Shkalim is read either on Rosh Chodesh Adar or the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Adar, and it's usually around the time of Parshas Tetzaveh, not necessarily that week, but around that week. So it could fall out on Parshas Tetzaveh. Now, what's unique about Parshas Tetzaveh is that it's the week before Parshas Kisisa, and since Parshas Shkalim, for Parshas Shkalim we read from Parshas Kisisa, so what you will end up with is you will read Parshas Tetzaveh, and then for the maftir, you'll go right into the following week's parsha. So let's say that's the case. So if Parsha Shkalim falls out on Tetzaveh, Amar B'Yitzchak Nafcha, Karo Shisa Mive'ata Tetzaveh, Ad Kisisa, B'chad Mikisisa, Ad V'yasisa. So the first 6 aliyahs would be from Parshas Tetzaveh. You'd read the whole Parshas Tetzaveh for the first 6 aliyahs, up until Parshas Kisisa, and the 7th aliyah would be Parshas Kisisa, not the whole thing, but the beginning of it where it talks about the count, and it talks about bringing your half shekel, up until V'yasisa, up until the instruction to make a kior, which starts a new topic. So you read the beginning of Parshas Kisisa for the 7th aliyah. Again, we do a version of this, which is we read 7 aliyahs from Tetzaveh, and then as the maftir we read Parshas Kisisa, but it's very similar. So that's Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha's opinion, that you would read 6 aliyahs from Tetzaveh, and then the 7th one would be Kisisa. Amar Abaye says there's a problem with this. Top of the next page. Amri ukumihu dekamukmi hasam. People will think that you're just continuing, that the parsha just continues. People won't realize that you're reading Parsha Shkalim. The whole idea of Parsha Shkalim is to announce that people should bring their half shekel, but they have to notice something out of the ordinary. You're reading a parsha that you wouldn't be reading otherwise. But if you're just reading straight, you go from Tetzaveh into Kisisa, so then people will just think that the parsha continues, and they won't realize that it's a special Parsha Shkalim. Elam Abaye, so rather says Abaye, this is what you would have to do. Karushisa Meviata Tetzaveh Ad V'yasisa. What you would do is you'd read straight, the first 6 aliyahs would be from Tetzaveh all the way till the end of Tetzaveh, and then including the beginning of Kisisa, and up until V'yasisa, up until the instruction to make the kior. V'chad, and then another one, Tani V'kari Mikisisa Ad V'yasisa. He would repeat the beginning of Parshas Kisisa up until V'yasisa, the instruction to make the kior. And that way, something out of the ordinary would be happening, because you would be reading the beginning of Kisisa twice in a row, and that way people will take note. Why? Meaning, nobody will think that you're just continuing, because you did that already. You read from Tetzaveh straight through into the beginning of Kisisa, and then you read the beginning of Kisisa again. People will realize that this is special for Parsha Shkalim. That is Abaye's opinion. Meisvei. But we have a contradiction from a Brisa. The Brisa says, Chalios beparsha hasmuchala. If Shkalim falls out the week that's samuch, that's next to the parsha of Shkalim, meaning next to Kisisa, bein milofna bein milachria, whether it falls out before, whether it falls out after, karing osa, you read it, the kofling osa, and then you read it a second time. So that's what the Brisa says. It says if it comes out a week that's next to it, you read it, and then you read it a second time. Now what does that sound like? It sounds like Abaye. Abaye said that when it falls out in Parshas Tetzaveh, the week that's Samach, that's next to Kisisa, you read Shkalim, and then you read it again. You read it twice. You read the beginning of Kisisa twice. That sounds like Abaye. So Bishlam ala Abaye nicha. So it makes sense according to Abaye. It's good. that you read it twice. Elo Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Kashya, but according to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, it's difficult. It doesn't make sense. What does it mean that you read it twice? He didn't say to read it twice. He said, read Tetzaveh, 6 aliyahs, and then read the beginning of Kisisa for the 7th aliyah. You're not reading it twice. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha will respond, Ula Abaye minicha? Does this price actually make sense according to Abaye? The way that you're explaining it doesn't make sense according to him either. Because your understanding koflin means read it twice the same week. Now, Teinach Lifanel. Now that makes sense if it comes out a week, that Shkalim falls out on a week that's next to Kisisa, before Kisisa, meaning if it's Tetzaveh. But if it fell out the week after Kisisa, how would you have the case that you read it twice? In other words, the Brisa said, whether it falls out, it says if the Parsha of Shkalim falls out on a week that's adjacent to the Parsha of Shkalim, meaning that's adjacent to Kisisa, whether before, whether after, meaning whether it's Tetzaveh, whether Shkalim is Parshas Tetzaveh the week before Kisisa, or whether Shkalim is Parshas Vayakel the week after Kisisa, either way, Koflin, you read it twice. Now, Abaye's explanation of reading it twice fits with the Brisa in terms of reading it the week, if it comes out the week before, meaning Abaye said, if Shkalim falls out the week of Tetzaveh, so read Tetzaveh straight into Kisisa, and then read Kisisa again twice. But in the scenario where it said Bein Lachara, whether it comes out after, it was Vayakel, so you're going to read Vayakel, and then you're going to read Kisisa twice. Why would you do that? Kisisa was last week's parsha. It doesn't run into it. That wouldn't make sense. So it must be that Koflin doesn't mean to read it twice that same week. Ella Mayis L'Cholimer. So what do you have to say? Kofla b'Shabbosos. What it means is read it twice, meaning 2 weeks in a row. Not twice in a row on one Shabbos. 2 weeks in a row. So here too, it means, on both sides of the coin, it means read it 2 weeks in a row. In other words, what this Brisa is actually saying, which is how we explained it last week, when the Gemara quoted the Brisa as well, is that if Shkalim falls out either the week before Kisisa or the week after, so it will turn out that you're reading the beginning of Kisisa 2 weeks in a row, because you read it Parsha Shkalim the week before, and then you read it the next week, Parshas Kisisa. Or if Shkalim is after, you read Kisisa, and then the week after, if it's Vayakel, if it's Parsha Shkalim, you'll read Kisisa again, the beginning. So you're going to be kofel, you're going to read it twice. The Brisa is saying you'll read it 2 weeks in a row, that's fine. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, we'll say to you that that's what the Brisa means. And it fits into his opinion, going back to our machlokas, to the dispute at hand, which was, if Shkalim falls out on Tetzaveh, how do you do it? So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said, you read 6 aliyahs of Tetzaveh and 1 from Kisisa. And Abaye said, you read 6 aliyahs from Tetzaveh and the beginning of Kisisa, and then you read Kisisa again for the 7th aliyah. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, though, will fit into this Brisa, because he'll say that you read Kisisa you read Tetzaveh 6 aliyahs, then you read Kisisa as Parsha Shkalim, and then Kofla b'Shabbosos, you read it again the next week. That's what the Brisa is saying. You read it twice, 2 weeks in a row. And the same would be true if Shkalim is Vayakel, was the week after Kisisa, you would read it twice in a row. Okay. Chalios b'Kisisa atzma. What if Parsha Shkalim falls out the week of Kisisa itself? So it's now I don't think this happens the way that our calendar is set up, but let's say it would. If it would fall out on Kisisa itself. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Karu Shisa min ve'asisa ad vayakel, v'chad karim b'Kisisa ad ve'asisa. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, in that case, you have to distinguish. So what you have to do is read the whole Parshas Kisisa till the end. That would be the first 6 aliyahs. And then after you would read Kisisa again. I mean, you couldn't get away with just reading Kisisa once. Then it wouldn't stand out there. It's Parshas Shkalim. So you'd read the whole Parshas Kisisa, and then you read it, the beginning again as the maftir. Master Abaye asked on him, Hashta Amri Lamafrehu Dekari. People will ask, you're reading backwards. It's going to confuse people. You read the whole Kisis and then you go back to the beginning. So Abaye doesn't explain exactly what his issue with this is. Lamafreya, what's wrong with reading out of order? Maybe just in general, there's a problem to read out of order. Maybe people will think that you went back because there was something wrong with the first reading. They won't understand that it's because of Parsha Shkalim. Abaye doesn't like that you're going back. So Elam Abaye. So rather Abaye says, this is what you have to do. Karu Shisa ad Vayakel. Sorry, I made a mistake. Let's go back a step. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha didn't say what I said. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said that you don't read Kisisa twice. You start the parsha late. You start the parsha from V'yasisa. You skip until V'yasisa, and which is right after the beginning of Kisisa. It's the second Aliyah, it would be. And it's not the way that we start up on a regular Shabbos, it's not the second Aliyah, but I don't think. But you start from V'yasisa, which is a little bit into Parshas Kisisa, which talks about making the kior, the basing. And then you read to the end of the parsha, and then, since it's Shkalim, you go back to the beginning and you read Kisisa, the beginning. That's what Abaye doesn't like. Abaye says, you're reading out of order. You can't do that. So rather, what do? He says you read it twice. You read from the beginning of Kisisa until the end of the parsha, and then you go back and you read the beginning of Kisisa again. That's what Abaye says. Elam Abaye Karushisa and Vayakel. 6 read from Kisisa up until the end of the parsha, until Vayakel. And then then the 7th guy goes back and reads the beginning of the parsha again for Shkalim. And Tanya Kavasei to Abaye, we have a brisa like Abaye Chalios beKisisa Atzma. The brisa says if parsha Shkalim falls out on Kisisa itself, Karinosa v'Kofanosa. You read it and you read it again. You'll read it twice. Okay, and that's what again, I don't think it actually happens that Shkalim falls out on Kisisa the way that our calendar is set up. Okay, at least I don't remember it ever happening. Chalios Bisocha Shabbos, Maktimo Shabbos Shavra. So going back to the Mishnah said that if Parsha Shkalim fell out on Rosh Chodesh Adar, so then you read Shkalim on Rosh Chodesh Adar. If it falls out during the week, if Rosh Chodesh falls out in the middle of the week, let me go back. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, you read Shkalim on Rosh Chodesh Adar. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in the week, then you read Shkalim the week before Rosh Chodesh Adar. Itmar, it was said, Rosh Chodesh Adar shechalios be'erev Shabbos. What if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Friday? So the Mishnah talks about if it falls out on Shabbos, you read Shkalim on Shabbos. It talks about if it falls out during the week, which may include Friday, but it may not. That's up for discussion here. If it falls out during the week, you read on the Shabbos before. Now we're asking, what if it falls out on Friday? Is that the same as during the week? Is that different? So Rav Amar Makdiming. Rav says it's the same as if it fell out during the week. We would read Shkalim the week before, the Shabbos before. If Rosh Chodesh is on a Friday, that's just like Rosh Chodesh being on a Thursday or a Wednesday or a Tuesday. We'd read Shkalim the Shabbos before. Ushmuel Amar Ma'achar. And Shmuel says, no. We would read Shkalim the next day after Rosh Chodesh Adar. If Rosh Chodesh Adar is on a Friday, we would read Shkalim on the Shabbos that follows. Amar Lecha. Rav says Makdimin. Rav says we would go and read it before Dim King Batzrulu Yomi Shulchanos. Otherwise, you don't have enough time to warn the Shulchanos. The Shulchanos are the money changers. They have to set up their money changing shops so that they can provide people with shkalim to donate, and they need 2 weeks notice at least according to the minimally. We said last week that in the last Amud that according to Shimon Gamliel they need 2 weeks to prepare. Others say you need more, but that we seem to be happy with 2 weeks for them to prepare. And if you only read Shkalim after Rosh Chodesh, they're not going to have 2 weeks until the middle of the month, until the 15th. So they have to. You have to back up Shkalim to before Rosh Chodesh. That they have enough time to prepare. That's Rav. Ushmuel, Amar Shmuel says no. Ma'achrim, you can push it off the laning. Why? Because Amar Lecha, because they'll tell you Sof Chameser Ramali Shabsa Mikla. Because at the end of the day, the 15th is going to, if Rosh Chodesh Adar is on a Friday, the 15th is going to be a Friday. The 15th is when the Shulchanos are supposed to set up. But they're not actually going to set up on a Friday. It's Erev Shabbos. They're getting ready for Shabbos. So, the Shulchanos won't have Ad Chad b'Shabbos, so they're not going to start setting up until Sunday. So they do have 2 weeks to prepare. Because you read on Shabbos, and they have a full week, and then a full week, and then until Sunday, because they're not actually going to get set up until the 17th on a year like that. Because the 15th, if Rosh Chodesh is on a Friday, the 15th will be a Friday. They're not going to set up on a Friday. They're going to set up on Sunday, on the 17th, and so that's more than 2 weeks after you read Shkalim on the 2nd of the month. So you're fine. Hilkach Machron. Therefore, you can delay it. Okay, Tanan. We have a Mishnah. Our Mishnah, it says, Chalios b'socha Shabbos makdim in l'sha'avar. Our Mishnah said that if Rosh Chodesh falls out during the week, you read Shkalim the Shabbos before. Mafsikin l'Shabbos achar, so then you're going to have a week in between Shkalim and Zachar. Now, my lava fuel b'erev Shabbos, isn't this true even if it falls out on Shabbos? That's what it sounds like. It says if it falls out during the week. That's Friday is included in that. Lo, b'tocha Shabbos dafka. Now, we mean during the week. We don't mean Friday. That's what Abaye will respond. Abaye will say, no, the Mishnah means if it falls out during the week. But Friday is not during the week. Friday is the end of the week. And if it falls out on Friday, we don't back up Shkalim. We read it the next day on Shabbos. That's, again, Abaye's opinion. Tashma, come and listen to another attempted proof. Ezohi Shabbos Rishona. What is the first of these 4 Shabboses, these 4 special Shabboses? 4 special Parshas. Kol Shachar Rosh Chodesh Adar Lios B'Socha. Whichever one, Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in it. Vafilu B'Erev Shabbos. And even if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Erev Shabbos. So the Brisa says, what is the first parsha? Whichever week Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in, and even if it falls out on Erev Shabbos. Now, my lav, doesn't this mean to say afilu be'erev Shabbos dumya detocha? That even Erev Shabbos would be the same as tocha, as during the week. Ma tocha makdim, and just like if it falls out during the week, in the middle of the week, we back it up. We have Shkalim the Shabbos before. Af Erev Shabbos makdim, and so too, if it falls out on Erev Shabbos, it should be the week before. That's what it sounds like. It says, whatever week Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in, and even Erev Shabbos, sounds like we read the Shabbos before. Amar Shmuel says no, but. No, what it means is that when it says in it, it doesn't mean during the week, it means on Shabbos itself. So you read this, but this Brisa is not talking about if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out during the week. It's talking about if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos. And you read the Brisa, what's the first parsha? Whichever Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on, and even Erev Shabbos, if it falls on Erev Shabbos, you also read it the next day on the Shabbos. That's how Shmuel is going to read the Brisa, in order for Abaye to fit it in. Sorry, not Abaye. This is how Shmuel will read the Brisa. Shmuel, and that was also taught in the Beis Medrash of Shmuel, but that you read this, it means that's how they taught this Brisa. Whichever, they would read it like this: which Shabbos is the first parsha, whichever one Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on, that Shabbos will be Parsha Shkalim, and even Erev Shabbos, if it falls on Erev Shabbos, also that next Shabbos will be Parsha Shkalim. And this Brisa just doesn't speak about what happens if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out during the week. That's how Shmuel will explain this this brisa. Okay. Says the Gemara, Kitanai. This seemingly is a machlokas Tanaim, a dispute between Tanaim how to deal with this, because the brisa says misargin l'shabasos, that it's okay to have a week that we skip in between. We can have a week in between Shkalim and Zachar. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says ein misargin. We don't skip. And Amar Rabbi Shimon Elazar says ein masayani Omer ein misargin. When do I say we don't have a week in between, a week break? That's bizman shachal yos b'erev Shabbos. That's if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Erev Shabbos, then we won't skip. We won't have a week in between. But if it falls out during the week, Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out during the week, Makdim, then you would read the week before, B'Korim Mishabbos Sha'avra, Av B'Shur Shvat, and we would read Shkalim the week before, even though it's still Shvat. So this second opinion, Rabbi Shimon Elazar, is saying that he's saying we don't skip, we don't have a week break. When do we not have a week break? If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Friday, and certainly falls out on Shabbos. If it falls out on Shabbos, everybody would agree there's no break. Because if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, and Shkalim is Rosh Chodesh Adar, that means that Purim, let's just if Rosh Chodesh Adar is a Shabbos, that means the 15th of Adar is a Shabbos, which means Purim is on a Friday, which means that you had to read Zachar the week before Purim, which is going to be the second Shabbos. So there wouldn't be a break. You have Shkalim on Aleph Adar, the first of Adar, and you have 7 days later you have Zachar on the 8th of Adar, which is the next Shabbos, and then Purim will be the following Friday. That's if Rosh Chodesh Adar is on a Shabbos. Now, the second opinion here, Reb Shimon Elazar is saying, so too if Rosh Chodesh Adar is on a Friday, there's no break. Why? Because you read Shkalim the next day, on the 2nd of Adar. If Rosh Chodesh is Friday, you read Shkalim on Shabbos after, the 2nd of Adar, and then, again, Parshas Zachar is going to be the next Shabbos. There won't be a break, according to this opinion. While Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi maintained that there would be a break even in that case. Because just like if it falls out during the week, you go back and read Shkalim the week before, in the middle of Shvat still. So too, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on a Friday, he holds you go back and read Shkalim the week before, and that means there will be a break between Shkalim and Zachar. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and that is in line with the opinion of Rav. Okay. Now we move on to the discussion of Parshas Zachar. Back to the Mishnah says B'Shniya Zachar. The second week, the second parsha is Parshas Zachar. Itmar. It was said, Purim shechal yos b'erev Shabbos. If Purim falls out on a Friday, which we were just discussing, so then Rav Amar Makdim in Parshas Zachar. Rav says that we read Parshas Zachar the week before Purim. Ushmuel Amar Ma'achar, and Shmuel says no, we would read Parshas Zachar on the 15th of Adar, the next day. Rav Amar Makdimin. Rav says you should go back and read Zachar before Ki Heichi Delo Siktom Asiyah V'Zachira, because you don't want the deed to be before the remembrance. Purim speaks of the deed of destroying Amalek, destroying Haman and his followers and the Amalekim. That's what we read about on Purim, the Asiyah, the action. While Zachar is remember to destroy them. So remember to destroy them should come before the action. So Rav says you have to read Zachar before Purim. Shmuel Amar Ma'achar. And Shmuel says, no, it's okay to push it off till the next day. Why? Amar L'cha, I'll say to you, Kevan de'ikka mukafin da'avdi b'chamesar, because the cities that were surrounded by walls in the days of Yoshua ben Nun, including Yerushalayim, read on the 15th of Adar. So, which is that Shabbos. So they're going to have Asiyah Zachira B'Hadei Adadi Kasi, and they're going to have the action and the deed on the same day. That's good enough. So yes, there will be some people most people, who live outside of Yerushalayim, who will lose out having the mention of the remembrance before the action, because they're going to read Zachar the day after Purim, so they're going to read about the action before the remembrance. But for the people who celebrate Purim on the 15th, it's going to be on the same day, so that's great, that works, that's good enough, says Shmuel. Okay, Tanan, we're going to try to bring a proof from our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Bishniya Zachar. The second week is Zachar. Ask the Gemara, Vaki Mikla Reish Yarcha B'Shabbos, Mikla Purim B'Erev Shabbos. But hold on. If Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, which is the case that the Mishnah was talking about, where Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos and you read Shkalim on Shabbos, so then Purim is Friday, like we discussed before. Purim will be on a Friday, on the 14th. Uktani, and yet the Mishnah says Bishniya Zachar, that the second week you read Zachar. So it sounds like you, like Rav's opinion, you're makdim, you read it before. You advance it. The second week is going to be, it means the week before Purim. So Amar Papa will say, to defend Shmuel, My Shniya Lav Zachar. When it says the second week, it means the second week after the break, but the second special parsha is going to be Zachar. But not necessarily the second week in a row. Okay. Tashma, come and listen to another proof. Ezo Shabbos Shniya. Why is the second week? What's the second Shabbos? What's the second special parsha? Koshecha Purim Uyos Besocha. Whichever week Purim falls out in. Bafiu Erev Shabbos. And even if Purim is on Erev Shabbos, if Purim falls out during that week, you read Zachar. Now, my Rav Erev Shabbos Dumya Desocha. Now, doesn't this mean Erev Shabbos just like the case where Purim falls out in the middle, meaning Matocha Makdim and Raf Erev Shabbos Makdim. And just like if Purim falls out in the middle of the week, we read Zachar the Shabbos before, so too if it falls out on a Friday, we read Zachar the Shabbos before. Meaning the Bryce is saying, when do we read Zachar? If Purim falls out during that week, then we read Zachar the Shabbos before. And it says like, even if it's on Friday. It sounds like a proof for Rav that even when Purim's on a Friday, we back up Zachar to the week before. So Amar Shmuel, no, Shmuel, again, like we had before, you had a different version of this Brisa that it said the word ba, not besocha. That when do we read Parsha Zachar? Whichever week Purim falls out on that Shabbos. If Purim falls out on that Shabbos, we read Zachar on that day. And so too if Purim falls out on Erev Shabbos. Now, for us, Purim cannot fall out on Shabbos, but again, that was possible before they set the calendar. So whatever week if Purim falls out on Shabbos, then you read Zachar that day, says Shmuel. And so too if it falls out on Friday, you read Zachar that day, because if Purim is Friday for people outside of Yerushalayim, then people in Yerushalayim, Purim is Shabbos, and they would be reading Zachar and Megillah, it's a different discussion, but the Zechira and the Asiyah would be on the same day. Right? I guess that's something to consider. What does it mean the Asiyah is on that day? Because we don't read Megillah on Shabbos. Maybe this price would hold the way that Shmuel's reading it, that you do read Megillah on Shabbos if Purim falls out on Shabbos. I'm not sure. And that's how they taught the Brisa and the Beis Medrash of Shmuel, with the word ba, that it's talking about if Purim falls out on Shabbos, you read Zachar, and so too if it falls out on Erev Shabbos, you read it on the next day, the Shabbos that's the next day. Okay. Chalios b'Shabbos atzma. So now we have this discussion about what happens if Purim falls out on Shabbos itself. Amar Rav Huna says, "L'divrei hakol ein makdiming." Everybody would agree that we don't back up. Even Rav would agree we don't back up Zachar. If Purim is Shabbos, we read Zachar on Purim. Rav Nachman says no. Adayin hi machlokas. They would still argue in this case because maybe Rav's not happy with reading the Zechira and the Asiyah on the same day, the remembrance and the doing on the same day. He wants the Zechira to be before. So even if Purim is on Shabbos, he says you have to back up the Zechira, the remembrance, to the Shabbos before, and Zachar would have to be before. Itmar Nami was also stated, Amar Chia Bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav, It was said in the name of Rav, Purim Shechal Yos B'Shabbos, Maktim V'Kar B'Shabbos Avra Zachar. We have explicitly a tradition from Rav that Rav said that if Purim falls out on Shabbos, they would read the Megillah, they would read Zachar the Shabbos before. Okay. And now we discuss the next part of the Mishnah, which talks about Parshas Para. Bishlishis Paraduma. The third parsha was Parshas Para, which we read about the preparation of the ashes of the red heifer, the Paraduma, which is used to purify someone, which was necessary to bring the Karban Pesach, which is coming up. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, Ezo Shabbos Shlishis, which is the third week, which is the third parsha, which is Parshas Para, Kol Shesmuchol Purim, Me'acharad. It's the one that's right after Purim, adjacent to Purim afterwards, right after Purim. Okay. Itmar Bar was said, Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina Amar Shabbos Asmuchol Rosh Chodesh Nisan. There it's the Shabbos that's next to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is not necessarily going to be the same week. So which one is it? Do you read Para the week after Purim, the Shabbos after Purim, or do you read Para the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Nisan? Says the Gemara, it's not a machok, it's not a dispute. Hadikol Rosh Chodesh Nisan b'Shabbos, hadikol be'emtza Shabbos. It depends what day of the week Rosh Chodesh Nisan is on. If Rosh Chodesh Nisan is on a Shabbos, so then you would read HaChodesh on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And if you could read HaChodesh on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, then the week before that you would read Parshas Para. Because Parshas Para is really the preparation for Nisan, for HaChodesh, for the Karban Pesach. So Parshas Para precedes HaChodesh immediately. That's really going to be the rule. Is Parshas Para is always the week before HaChodesh. So the question is going to be, when's HaChodesh? If Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out on Shabbos, then we can read HaChodesh on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And if that's the case, then we can read Para the Shabbos before that, which is the Shabbos right before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But if Rosh Chodesh Nisan is not on a Shabbos, so then you would read HaChodesh the week before that, whatever day it is. Let's say Rosh Chodesh Nisan is a Thursday. So then the previous Shabbos would be HaChodesh, and it wouldn't be Para. So when would Para be? Para would be the week before, which is the week after Purim. So when Rosh Chodesh Nisan is on a Shabbos, then HaChodesh is read on that Shabbos. And that means Para is read the week before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is not going to be the week after Purim. But if Rosh Chodesh Nisan is during the week, then HaChodesh is read the Shabbos before that, then Para is backed up another week. That's going to be the Shabbos after Purim. It won't be the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. HaChodesh is being read the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. It will be the Shabbos after Purim. And so it just depends on the year. Most years, I guess, HaChodesh would probably, Para would be the week right after Purim. But specifically on weeks where Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out on Shabbos, so then Parshas Para would not be the week right after Purim, it would be the following week, which would be the week before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Okay, thank you for listening. We'll continue from here next time.